3 years ago, I committed to the British people that I would renegotiate our position in the European Union and hold an in-out referendum. Now I'm delivering on that commitment. You will decide, and whatever your decision, I will do my best to deliver it.
Turning to the UK now, polling is underway to decide whether Britain stays in or leaves the European Union. Over 46 million registered voters are expected to cast their ballots. The latest polls show that the UK is in favour of remaining a member nation of the EU. According to an online populist poll published on Twitter, 55% of voters supported staying in the EU, with 45% opting for Brexit.
There has been a big move in the polls over the weekend. Last Thursday, the FT poll of polls relating to the Brexit vote was 48 leave to 43 remain. That same poll this morning, after 4 individual polls came out of the weekend, is 44 each. And that's clearly had a big effect on markets around the world, rallying as the Remain vote suddenly gains a bit of traction.
The clock is ticking for Brits to decide whether to stay within or leave the European Union. Latest poll numbers show public sentiment is leaning slightly towards Remain.
Opinion polls, although still close, have seen a rise in support of those campaigning to remain in the European Union.
The polls are now closed across the United Kingdom, where voters weighed in on whether Britain should, in fact, exit the European Union. A YouGov online survey, which asked UK citizens how they voted today, was just released. It shows 52% voted remain, while 48% voted leave. This is just one poll, of course, and it's also an online poll, and these aren't official results, so you should take it all with a big pinch of salt.
There we are. That is now statistically, mathematically there, that the Leave campaign have won, and we're expecting at the end of the count 52% for Leave, 48% for Remain. Quite an extraordinary moment.
The UK has voted to leave the European Union.
The decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed by this referendum to leave the EU.
Well, Donald Trump has just landed by helicopter in Aberdeen, Scotland, amid the fallout from the Brexit vote. Most polls predicted Britain would stay in the European Union. All the smart people thought it would. But Trump and our next guest and a few of us had it right.
I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
The most recent CBS News national poll shows Hillary Clinton with a 9-point lead over Donald Trump.
We're going to bring in ABC's Matt Dowd now to break down our latest ABC News poll, and down the stretch they come. We've been talking about Hillary Clinton opening up that lead. Enthusiasm for her is also growing.
Yeah, as we've talked about, the thing to focus on is not the undecided voters, it's the enthusiasm of supporters. And for 6 months, Donald Trump had a gain on that, had a margin of victory on that. And now Hillary Clinton has taken a slight lead on enthusiasm of voters. And when you're looking at the last 15 days, that's what matters most.
4 out of 5 from 1972 to 1988, where the winning candidate took at least 40 states and 400 electoral votes. Those were landslides. But since then, well, we haven't had any on that scale. And supposedly, it's just not possible anymore. The country is more polarized now. There's red America, there's blue America, there's almost nothing in between. Only a handful of states are really up for grabs in any given election. That is what we've become used to. But, and I don't want to oversell this here, but at least right now, in this moment, we're seeing an interesting possibility in this presidential race. Our new NBC News SurveyMonkey poll is out today. It puts Hillary Clinton up by 10 points over Donald Trump. And this is not the first poll since the conventions to give Clinton a double-digit lead. This is actually the fourth. 4 polls that have Clinton up by more than 10 points, or at least 10 points. Her lead is reaching levels we just didn't see in the past few campaigns. How is he doing in these states that are the most promising for him to flip, at least in his strategy? So let's take a look. First of all, we have a poll out of Pennsylvania. This is a brand new poll. This came out a couple hours ago. NBC News, Marist. Well, look at this. A double-digit lead for Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania. Hardly the first double-digit lead for Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania. This is the third one we've seen in a week for her. So Donald Trump, Pennsylvania is a big target, but all the evidence we have right now says Pennsylvania is still still favored to be a Democratic state.
Some big news here, Megyn. Huge news. Actually, the AP now projecting that Donald Trump has won the state of Pennsylvania.
What about Ohio? We have a brand new poll out of Ohio. Donald Trump doing a little better here, but he is still down in Ohio, a 5-point gap. So again, right now, Donald Trump targeting Ohio just like he's targeting Pennsylvania, but he's not there right now. Clinton's still leading in Ohio.
We have a major projection right now. Donald Trump will take Ohio. CNN projects Donald Trump will win Ohio with its 18 electoral votes.
Another one, brand new NBC Marist poll out of Iowa today. Again, a little bit closer, but a 4-point lead for Hillary Clinton. This is supposed to be a ripe target for Donald Trump. He had his convention. He's had chances here. He was out there for the caucuses earlier this year. He is still trailing in this poll in Iowa. Closer, he could turn it around. But again, for right now, is Donald Trump ahead in Iowa? Not in this poll.
We've got another big state. It's an important one. Actually, it's a small state, but it's a very important one. It's the state of Iowa. 6 electoral votes. Last voted Republican for George W. Bush in 2004. It has gone to Donald Trump.
We don't have new polls today, but Wisconsin, Michigan, these are other states. Donald Trump has talked about flipping with the Rust Belt strategy. We have not seen a poll that puts him ahead in these states. So again, the burden is still on Donald Trump to show that he can do something Mitt Romney and a whole bunch of other Republicans over the last generation or so couldn't do, and that is actually win these states.
CNN now projects that Donald Trump will carry the state of Wisconsin. He will win Wisconsin with its 10 electoral votes. He's cracked the so-called blue wall that Hillary Clinton had tried to create.
Michigan, after all these years, could be the one state that flips it for a Republican president.
And this state hasn't gone red in a presidential since 1988.
That's the first thing that's going wrong for Trump. The bigger problem is this, though. These are the blue states he thinks he can flip. How about the red states he needs to hold? How about the states Romney won in 2012 that Trump maybe is just assuming he's going to hold? Well, check this out. Brand new numbers out of North Carolina. North Carolina was a Mitt Romney state in 2012. Well, right now in this poll, Hillary Clinton has the lead. Very close. Certainly Donald Trump could still win it. I'd call it a toss-up state, but we have seen polls putting Hillary Clinton ahead there. It is possible Hillary Clinton could end up flipping North Carolina, making it a blue state.
We have another state to project. It is the state of North Carolina, big battleground state. It's going to Donald Trump. 15 electoral votes right there, one of his core 4 states. So Matthew Dowd, he is filling in that map the way he needs to fill it in.
Trump's problem, though, gets a lot worse than North Carolina. Look at this. Georgia, new poll, 7-point lead here for Hillary Clinton. Not the first poll that we've seen putting her ahead in Georgia. This is a state that last went Democratic back in 1992. Again, Donald Trump could still take Georgia, but Hillary Clinton certainly has a chance to flip Georgia.
It is the state of Georgia, 16 electoral votes. They are going to go to Donald Trump as well.
All this talk about Trump turning blue states red, we could see the opposite happening with Hillary Clinton having a double-digit lead nationally. But it's not just North Carolina. It's not just Georgia. Look at this. This came out just about 2 hours ago. Kansas, one of the most Republican states in the country. The margin here was more than 20 points for Mitt Romney in 2012. Donald Trump leading by just 5 points in Kansas. Remember, there's a lot of big suburbs right outside of Kansas City on the Kansas side. You got suburban, moderate, professional, college degree Republicans there. That's the type of Republican Trump has been struggling with. And when Trump is struggling with that type of Republican, you're going to see this type of result. He could be vulnerable in a state like Kansas. It's still a real stretch to say Hillary Clinton's going to win it, but there is the possibility there that Donald Trump is going to have to fight for it. So, again, you would take that and say, not a sure thing for Trump.
Donald Trump, we project, will win Kansas with its 6 electoral votes.
Just like we've seen polls that say Utah is not a sure thing for Trump.
Donald Trump will win the state of Utah, which has been very contested. Evan McMullin and third party, a Mormon in Utah, gave Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton a run for their money out there. And that was very much in question, whereas it's almost always gone Republican. But this year around, there was a question about it, and Utah has now gone for Trump.
Just like we've seen polls that say Arizona, not a sure thing for Trump. In fact, there have been polls putting Hillary Clinton ahead there.
Arizona.
When you get to a 10-point race nationally, which you have 4 polls in the last week saying Donald Trump could have to worry about Indiana.
Indiana, with its 11 electoral votes.
he could have to worry about Missouri. If this holds up, and it's a big if, again, Donald Trump could close the gap, could be a different story in a month. But if Hillary Clinton could sustain the kind of lead she has leaped out into this race, you could see other states that suddenly get crazy, states you wouldn't have even imagined, like a South Carolina, even a Texas. They could at least become competitive. And what it would mean doesn't mean Hillary Clinton's going to win all of these. It means we could have more competitive states than we ever imagined. That's the way, the lay of the land right now at this low moment for Donald Trump.
Donald Trump will be the 45th president of the United States, winning the most unreal, surreal election we have ever seen.
It was predicted that Brexit wouldn't happen, that Donald Trump wouldn't win the presidency, and that the coalition wouldn't win a third term. With the silent majority being touted as a reason behind recent Conservative successes, why is it that progressive parties such as Labor are so out of touch with the majority of voters?
Whatever I felt, I thought Dewey was going to win. I didn't know anyone who thought otherwise. Anybody.
As the campaign drew to a close, the New York Times was predicting Dewey would run away with the election. The Gallup poll was so certain of the outcome, it stopped polling before the end of October.
The night of the election, the head of the Secret Service went to New York to be with Mr. Dewey because he clearly was going to be the next president. And it just looked like a sure thing. And the only one who didn't think it was a sure thing was Harry Truman.
One evening, 3 or 4 days before the election, an anxious Bess Truman went quietly to see her husband's aide, Clark Clifford.
She said, "Clark, do you think Harry really believes that he can win?" And I said, "He gives every assurance of it, Mrs. Truman." She says, "Well, he keeps saying he's going to win." Well, I said, "That's the way he feels." I said, "He's going to feel that way right up to the end." But she said, "It's so hard to find anybody else who thinks that he can win." I think she felt that he did not have any chance of winning.
On election night, to escape reporters, Truman checked into a hotel in Excelsior Springs, just outside of Independence. He had a ham and cheese sandwich, a glass of buttermilk, and went to sleep. When he woke up, he learned he had pulled off the greatest upset in the history of American politics. Not one pollster or radio commentator or newspaper columnist had got it right. No one had dared predict a Truman victory.
But now we're going to bring you the results of another British general election with all the resources now the BBC could muster in 1970. In the next few hours, those scoreboards over there with the tot up the seats gained and lost for each party will be indicators of raw political power. We'll try to bring you the results instantly and to tell you what they'll mean.
The essence of tonight's story will be told on the State of the Parties Board. By tomorrow, this board will show the composition of the new House of Commons. To be sure of a bare majority over all other parties, the winning party must get 316 seats of the 630 at stake. As the results come in, we'll be especially watching the top right-hand corner of the board, gains and losses. This is the real battleground. To knock out Labour's overall majority, the Tories must inflict on them 33 net losses. And to secure an overall majority for themselves, the Tories must make 53 net gains. Well, now, let's take a look at what the opinion polls had to say finally about the prospects as they saw them. Frankly, they were all over the place, and quite possibly one or two maybe on the chopping block by tomorrow. ORC in the Evening Standard tonight was giving a 1% Conservative lead, pointing to a probable majority for the Conservatives over Labour of 20 points. At the other extreme, yesterday, Marplan in the Times was pointing to a 9% Labour lead, pointing to far better than 125, nearer 150 lead for Labour over the Conservatives. Now, the only sensible thing to do in this rather curious situation is to point to the average. Averaging all these up, you get 4.3% Labour lead as the considered judgment of 5 opinion polls. Now, Labour won last time with 7.3. They're pointing now to a 4.3. In other words, the Tories have chopped back the lead that Labour had in 1966 by 3 points. Converted into a swing, it looks this way. Here we had the position at the end of the last election, Labour with 111 majority over the Conservatives. Now, the opinion polls on average are saying a 1.5% Tory swing. They've cut back Labour a bit since 66, pointing again to a 70-seat lead for Labour over the Conservatives. But what Ted Heath needed to get was a 3.3% swing to knock out Labour's majority, or a 4.3% swing to give the Conservatives an overall majority. That's what he will be watching. Can he do it, in spite of what the opinion polls have said, in the battle that begins in a few moments' time? The opinion polls are on the chopping block. If they go wildly out, equally, every expectation will be foiled if the Tories can do what's required to get that position.
Can I ask you what you would have voted?
Labour.
Do you expect them to get in this time?
I think so.
With the same majority and increased majority?
No, reduced majority.
Why would you say it would be a reduced majority?
Well, all the opinion polls seem to point to that, don't they?
And who do you think is going to win the election tonight?
Well, I think Labour will win.
By what sort of majority?
Well, not such a large majority as the opinion polls say, probably about 100, 50 to 100.
The Prime Minister, Mr. Harold Wilson, chose to hold this general election today, June the 18th. The choice is essentially his. And of course, he chooses the date because he feels that that's the date on which he can best win. Now we're going to see if he chose right. He chose June. Who did you choose? If the Labour Party gets a big majority, we could have a Labour government through to 1975. If the result is close, we could have another election campaign and another election in this year. And there are certain indications that the result will be very close. Or perhaps the opinion polls have been all wrong. Mr. Heath will be the Prime Minister for the first time tomorrow evening.
Well, Mr. Wilson is now at this moment in his suite at the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool, 15 minutes from the hall here at Highton, waiting with colleagues and friends for the first results to come through. It's felt here that he may have become rather less confident about the size of majority he expects in the last day or so. He'll certainly be anxiously watching television for that first declaration to come through.
And this is Bexley Ted Heath's electorate, where if the poll shows such a big lead for Labour against him, you would never know to look at Ted Heath here today. He's been touring his electorate, and party morale here, we're told, remains indestructible.
The Tories are reporting in Guildford that, in fact, they've got an increased percentage of the poll. This is what they're saying.
Well, of course, they had a majority of over 8,000 last time.
These are the first indications that are coming in on grapevines that seem to spread out their tentacles.
I think it'd be rather surprising if they didn't have a slightly increased percentage of the poll, because nobody really, in the light of today's polls, expects the Labour Party to be back with an increased majority. They're back with a decreased majority. Every Conservative should have a slightly increased majority, I'd have thought.
This is sensational. The opinion polls were talking about a 1.5% swing to the Conservatives. We've been getting 5% and 6% in these first two results. In other words, if they are confirmed later, it's a wide open question, if they're confirmed later, then the Conservatives have broken through the 4.3% swing they had to get to be sure of a working majority. David says, on his reckoning, these are two good predictor seats. Much too early to say with confidence, but if it happens all over the country, the Conservatives achieved what the polls said they wouldn't achieve, namely the kind of breakthrough they needed to get a Conservative majority. The whole thing becomes very exciting indeed now, Cliff.
That was a 4.9% swing to the Conservatives in Salford, which has always been sometimes varied. In 1959 it misled us, but a 4.9% swing is more than is enough needed to return the Conservatives to power. There was a 65% poll there, which was down 1.5. on last time.
I believe Stanley Orm's majority there was halved, certainly.
Yes.
It was down a long time. I think in just a moment we really ought to try and get hold of Graham Pyatt over there, who's got a ton of computer stuff coming out. Now, we've got 1, 2, 3. Have you been able to put these into your computer yet, or has it said anything?
Yes, indeed. The computer has been making predictions as the results have come in. At this stage, they're no more reliable than simply computing the national average swing, which is now running at a little over 5%. On that basis, we would have a Conservative majority over Labour of about 53 seats. But of course, there's a great deal of uncertainty associated with that.
Well, a moment ago, Enoch Powell went right off our national swingometer as well with almost a 9% swing. But every result is in this area now, settling into over 6% on average swing to the Conservatives. And I wouldn't hesitate on this evidence to say the Labour government is defeated and that Edward Heath is the next Prime Minister of the country.
The Queen has asked me to form the next government, and I am indeed proud to accept.
Could I ask you very briefly, but very bluntly, what went wrong last time, 4 years ago in the general election, when nearly 4 out of 5 polls were wrong?
And looking at our final figures for Great Britain, which were not, of course, the figures that you used for the 10 o'clock forecast, but using the final figures up until voting ended at 10 o'clock, we had a Labour lead of 7.8, which is a swing of 4.4, which is in fact not enormously different from the actual result. They are sufficiently different to make a lot of difference in terms of seats. Having said that, I'm not defending it.
I mean, in fact, the post polls are supposed to be much more accurate. They're a larger sample. They don't have a lot of the uncertainty of forecasts. And yet the actual final margin, as far as we can make out, is going to be a Labour lead over the Conservatives of about 3%. This is a really pretty wide margin of error for a post poll.
Well, it means that we are going to be within 2 or 3% of each of the parties, which is not good, and I'm not defending it, but I don't think it's anything like as bad as, in fact, some people may have thought or said. I think one of the problems is that we had to produce the 10 o'clock forecast with voting up until 8:15. We had assumed that the pattern which we'd found at previous urban constituencies of, in fact, Labour pulling up in the last hour and a half was going to take place. It didn't happen. If anything, the gap, I think, narrowed in the last hour and a half. And that's one of the reasons why we produced some slightly odd estimates of seats at that time.
I think one of the things, Humphrey, has been that the poll taken on the actual day of polling has usually been very good indeed, and we've had much greater confidence in that, particularly after the successes in 1970 and in February. But of course, in some of the by-elections here and there, these polls have gone wrong. Is this because there are certain kinds of respondents who won't play this particular game? Some people coming out from the voting booths who still keep it confidential.
Well, I don't know the complete answer to that, and we're obviously doing a substantial post-mortem to try and find out more. I think one of the problems is that we have to, for obvious logistical reasons, to concentrate on a relatively small number of polling stations, and there's no actual hard information about how polling districts vote as opposed to wards or constituencies, and therefore we're not able to check whether our sample of polling stations is as representative as we can, for example, when we're taking a sample of constituencies. This is because obviously every time you cover a polling station, that's a team of interviewers. Another problem undoubtedly is refusals, and normally we thought that refusals tended to come more from elderly Conservatives. On this occasion, this does not seem to be the case.
But Humphrey, if this was a debacle for the post-polls, wasn't it even more of a debacle for the pre-polls? I mean, the actual forecasts, every one of them was suggesting a lead for the Labour Party, for the Conservative Labour Party of considerably more than 3%, and many of them were suggesting leads of 9–10%. This is as bad a result as the polls have ever had. I mean, 1970 was the worst one before this. This is rather worse than 1970.
When you were right.
I wouldn't say that it's worse than 1970. I don't think even that the size of the errors are as big as 1970, if you can describe them as such. I think that one has to make the point here that the polls, first of all, were correct in showing the direction of the swing. They were correct in showing the winner. They were correct in showing that the Liberal vote wouldn't rise. that the size of the actual the differences between the polls and the results are not enormous.
Well, now,
I think
Robin,
there's another very important point, if I may, which we did stress in every written report, I think, for every poll and every paper, that they were measuring voting intention at some period, some time before polling day. We always said that that was not a prediction, and in fact that things could change after the poll was taken. I think we've got good reason to believe they did change.
With gratitude and with determination, I accept your nomination.
Like many Americans, they have come to respect the dedication, the humanity, and the good sense of President Jimmy Carter.
If it's a definition he wants, I'll give him one. A recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours. And recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his.
I was governor for 8 years. I took a state that was pretty much like the federal government today, that was in debt, spending more than it was taking in, had great problems. And in 8 years, we straightened all that out. We reduced the taxes for the people over the years. We did all the things that government is supposed to do, and yet we were able to cut the increase in government costs in half, hold down the size of government, the bureaucracy, and so forth. So I think I've had some experience that qualifies me to seek this job.
His last rally of the 1980 campaign in a hangar. He got on the plane. Meanwhile, Jody Powell had gotten the word from the pollster Pat Goodell. It was over. He was going to lose, and he was going to lose big. You say, well, didn't he know that before then? Well, on the Friday before the election, the polls were dead even. Jimmy Carter's polls, the public polls, and Ronald Reagan's polls were dead even. People were clearly trying to find a way to not kill the king, to re-elect this guy. When my friend George Will says there was this great conservative tide sweeping Ronald Reagan to the country, well, where was it, George? It was like a tsunami, right? It didn't come up till the last minute.
Well, the time has come. You've seen the map. We've looked at the figures, and NBC News now makes its projection for the presidency. Reagan is our projected winner. Ronald Wilson Reagan of California, a sports announcer, a film actor, a governor of California, is our projected winner at 8:15 Eastern Standard Time. On this election night, we have projected Ronald Reagan the winner.
About an hour ago, I called Governor Reagan in California, and I told him that I congratulated him for a fine victory. I look forward to working closely with him during the next few weeks. We'll have a very fine transition period. I told him I wanted the best one in history.
The electoral vote total now brings Reagan over the 400 mark and brings Carter to 45 electoral votes.
There's a tremendous landslide. Unanticipated, unexpected, unpredicted. No one predicted this. If so, I didn't hear it.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
And will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
May I congratulate you, sir.
Hello, welcome back. Well, the politicians have just 2 more days of what's certain to be hard campaigning in which to win the voters' hearts and minds. This morning's opinion polls suggest, as many others do, a hung parliament, with Labour holding the majority of seats. Richard Tracy, why spend the last 2 days of the campaign talking about a hung parliament and the dangers of a hung parliament if you're so sure you're going to win?
Well, we're not talking about a hung parliament because despite what your poll is saying, what we're finding in the marginal seats, and it's those, of course, that will decide the election, is that we're getting a very good reception on the doorstep, and our candidates are very confident that they're going to cut through. Indeed, in London, which of course is the area I know best, we're even believing that we're going to take some seats off Labour.
The 11,000-strong rally is the nearest British equivalent to an American-style convention, an opportunity to anoint a leader and enthuse supporters. The shadow cabinet, which Labour has taken to calling the cabinet in waiting, were cheered in to the royal box. Labour are cheered by the opinion polls, but not carried away by them. They believe they show the Conservatives can't win, but not yet that Labour can.
With every day that passes, Neil looks more and more like the real tenant of number 10. We're all right! We're all right! We're all right! We better get some talking done here, serious talk. But this is the Labour Party. This is the party that's going to win the election and win for our country.
Do you think that it would be a good idea, in view of the fact that the campaign is now getting rough and the polls don't look very good for you, though you think they're all over the place, do you not think it would be a good idea to reconsider your refusal to have a face-to-face debate with Mr. Kinnock and perhaps Mr. Ashdown?
I'm having my debate with the electorate day after day and night after night. That's the debate I want to have. I want to put to them our ideas for the future of this country, listen to what they have to say, and persuade them that we have the right policies. That's the way forward.
Will you resign as Prime Minister if you don't win an overall majority?
It's purely hypothetical. I'm going to win an overall majority.
Yes, but all questions in an election are hypothetical, Prime Minister. What will you do if this? What will you do if that?
Prime Ministers answer questions when they're reality, not when they're hypothetical.
Not in an election.
And in this circumstance, I can absolutely assure you that I am confident that we are going to win a clear overall majority sufficient for 5 years.
Of course, it's possible that God may smile upon the Labour Party.
I think the electorate will smile upon the Conservative Party.
On Friday morning, the morning after, and there it is. Currently, Conservatives are holding 321 seats, Labour 269, Liberal Democrats 17. All others hold 13 in all. 31 seats still to be decided. Expected overall majority now hovers between 17 and 19 for the Conservatives.
I've just had an audience with Her Majesty the Queen following the dissolution of Parliament. The general election will be held on May the 7th.
Current polls put Labour and Conservative almost neck and neck.
Support for British Prime Minister David Cameron's Conservatives has had its highest level in over 2 years, one opinion poll showed on Monday. But two others put the opposition Labour Party ahead less than 3 months before a national election.
Unlike Ed Miliband and David Cameron, alas, I'm not pretending I'm going to be Prime Minister next Thursday. I wish it were otherwise, but I doubt it's an impending prospect.
Most polls since the start of the year have had Labour narrowly ahead or level with the Conservatives. Monday's Guardian ICM poll put the Conservatives on 36%, up 6 points from last month, at their highest level in that polling series since May 2012. Backing for Labour fell 1 point to 32%.
40 days to say this is a knife-edge election and it can only be cut two ways, Conservative or Labour.
David Cameron or Ed Miliband are going to walk into number 10 as Prime Minister. I don't think that's much in doubt, and that you have to decide which of those two. The real question is, who's going to go in there alongside them? Is it going to be Alex Salmond? Is it going to be Nigel Farage, or is it going to be me and the Liberal Democrats? And my great fear, as I was saying earlier, is if you have David Cameron dancing to the tune of Nigel Farage, or the Swivel-eyed Brigade on the right wing of the Conservative Party, or you have Ed Miliband basically at the beck and call of Alex Salmond, you lurch off to the right and the left, which is not what we need as a country.
All right, let's
start first off with the forecast that we have at the moment. Bear in mind, these are projected seats. There is a margin of error with these. This is from Election Forecast. But let's take these numbers as read, Akash, for a moment. Let's say these were accurate. Talk about 326, but of course Sinn Féin don't take up their seats. It's 321, and then of course there's the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker who don't vote. So it's below that number, but even so, that doesn't give them a majority.
Yeah, that's right. So on these numbers, I mean, there aren't really other credible potential partners for a Conservative-led government. So, yeah, the DUP are the other one they might well try and bring in. I mean, there's only one UKIP MP projected on these numbers, though whether the Liberal Democrats would be willing to work with them is an interesting question, or even maybe in some parts of the Conservative Party. So yes, on these numbers, certainly it would be difficult for David Cameron to put together a stable majority government.
I have to say to you, if either of them still think they're going to win a majority, they need to go and lie down in that darkened room.
It is 10 o'clock, the polls have closed, the general election is over, and our exit poll is predicting that the Conservatives are the largest party.
Well, he could ask for the DUP to join this coalition on this side, and he could try and bring them over to the government benches. But at the moment, under our forecast, even if you range all of these MPs together, including all the Labour MPs and the SNP MPs, they couldn't switch to this side and govern as a coalition because they do not make the 326 seats you need in the House of Commons for an overall majority. That's where we are at the moment with our forecast, and it leaves us poised, David, for a fascinating night.
I think there are four possibilities. The first is that the exit poll is right, and all the polls that came out in the last 24 hours, ours was one of 11, all 11 showed Conservative and Labour neck and neck.
If this exit poll is anywhere near right, this is beyond your worst nightmares.
If this exit poll is right, Andrew, I will publicly eat my hat on your programme.
We are now ready here at Sky News to project the final seat numbers for each party. And we are projecting that David Cameron will make it by a majority of 326.
David Cameron back to the address he knows well, not only as Prime Minister again, but with an uncomplicated, old-fashioned majority.
I've just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, and I will now form a majority Conservative government.
The polling was so catastrophically incorrect, and many of you, I know in the last few days, were telling yourselves, but this can't be like 1992 because they've changed the methodology, which is what every pollster was telling you.
It was last year's surprise general election result, and the reason it was a surprise was in part because opinion polls had consistently pointed to a much closer result, neck and neck in some cases, and led to endless speculation that the country was heading for a second hung parliament.
What are the polls, the early polls telling us?
So our latest poll has the Conservatives quite a way in front on 47 and Labour back down in 30. We've also found that since 2015, UKIP their vote share seems to have sort of decreased quite considerably. We've got them on 4%, and there doesn't appear to be a big Lib Dem fight back like some people might have thought. We've got them on 7% in our latest poll.
Theresa May still in office, but just how much power does she have? The election she called that she promised not to delivered not the thumping majority she sought, but in fact, no majority at all. A humiliation, but one nonetheless that lets her keep her job for now.
The exit poll is showing the Conservatives on 368 seats, Labour on 191, the Liberal Democrats on 13, the SNP on a massive 55. That is a Conservative majority predicted by the exit poll, a big Conservative majority. Terrible result for the Labour Party if that is actually the result that we see at the end of the evening. 86 majority, which is way above what anybody has projected in this election campaign. The whole day, the whole of Westminster has been agog thinking that we're heading for hung parliament territory. This is not hung parliament territory.
New polls today show Joe Biden with a lead there.
Our latest CBS News Battleground Tracker poll finds Biden with a 10-point national lead over President Trump, 52 to 42%.
We'll show you the numbers. Joe Biden has a big and a growing lead. Let's just take a look at the trend line here. Quinnipiac, you see the stretch? 15 points. The Washington Post also has him at 15 points. The NBC Wall Street Journal poll, 11 points. So a double-digit lead for Joe Biden.
In the battleground state of Michigan, he leads the president by 6 points. And in nearby Ohio, the president is ahead by just 1 point.
Trump supporters would say he came back last time. He was down last time. He was down last time.
Well, on the Friday before the election, the polls were dead even. Jimmy Carter's polls, the public polls, and Ronald Reagan's polls were dead even.
Scientific, scientific. You still sticking to that justification, scientific?
And the reason it was a surprise was in part because opinion polls had consistently pointed to a much closer result.
May we assume that even if you were to be...
I shouldn't assume anything. The assumptions generally turn out to be very wide of the mark.